Hi everyone, thanks for joining us, I should say, because I thought for today's video you were probably a bit sick of the sound of my voice. So we have a guest. This is Chris.
Hello.
Wave, hello, Chris. There he is at the other end of Zoom, of course, because of lockdowny, not seeing anyone face to face for the next foreseeable future thing. And this is going to be a short series of videos on, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But so I want to call this kind of interview setting beverages and baked goods. So I'm going to ask my guests each session to bring along or to have with them a beverage and a baked good. So today I have got a nice cup of lapsang there with my little manatee tea dispenser, and I have got some apple cake that I baked this afternoon with some apples that were given to me by Mark and Hannah, and I know Mark is watching, so thank you, Mark, for the apples. Unfortunately, it didn't go particularly well. This is all a bit crumbly because it's a vegan cake, so it doesn't have any egg in, and I massively underestimated the amount of apple sauce that I needed in this, so it has not held together at all. But with the help of a fork, I shall be able to consume that. Chris, what have you got for us today?
There's a Earl Grey with milk because I'm a barbarian.
Very nice. And nice mug there as well.
Oh yeah, Dread.
Yeah, classic gaze into the bread mug. Yeah, very good.
And a partially eaten Belgian bun.
Very nice. Partially eaten by you, I would hope.
Well, yes, by me, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. Is the correct answer. So Chris, today we're going to be talking a little bit about games from the 90s that were perhaps not as popular as they should have been, or lesser known games maybe. I don't know about you. When I was a young'un in the 90s, my knowledge of what was available from a wargaming perspective was pretty much the Argos catalogue. Didn't have a Games Workshop anywhere near us. The local toy shop had a selection of things, mainly kind of Games Workshop blisters. So if it didn't appear in the Argos catalogue, I wasn't really aware that it existed, and so missed out on a huge number of games. Were you a bit more connected into the games market in the 90s before the internet was a thing?
It's difficult to say, really. Only in as much as I often went to BT's with my dad.
Okay.
In Bristol, when BT's was still a thing. I don't know what you call BT's. I guess it was a toy shop. It started off as a toy shop, and then sort of branched out into all sorts of hobby things. I remember they had a massive range of adult action figures, Spawn. When Spawn came out and was a big thing, they had a big thing on that, but also large amounts of like Revel and Airfix model kits, which is why me and my dad would often go there, because we'd be picking up ACW stuff to play at home.
Yeah.
And they'd often have stuff there that I'd encounter, and like secondhand magazines as well that I'd pick up in places as well. So it's a bit difficult to think about how you encountered these things before the internet now, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But
well, it's so easy now, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
You could probably list a dozen sort of rule sets that are currently available, and probably find PDFs for most of them if I tried online. Whereas back in the 90s,
bit harder,
yeah.
But I mean,
you had to see it in a shop in order to lay your hands on it.
But then there was magazines like this. Particularly for everyone. This one was picked up from BT's. That introduced me to a whole bunch of stuff that I never knew existed. That's how I encountered Flintlock, in fact. Yes, first in here, when they had an article on the Grape Shot expansion that had just come out.
Okay.
And,
no, I was actually aware of Flintlock because there was in Salisbury, near where I grew up, there was a it was a model shop. It wasn't a games shop. It did mostly kind of historics and historical
Yeah.
kit models. But they had a flintlock range. I remember seeing it below the counter and being like, "Oh, that's like fantasy Napoleonic stuff. That looks interesting." But never got into it. Never really played.
Actually, that reminds me. Of course, the other place was Antics.
Oh, it was
Antics.
because it's in Broadmead now, isn't it? So,
Yeah, I mean, it was the Antics I went to was Gloucester usually.
okay.
They had a big area upstairs that was, I guess, the nerdier side of the model shops. So they had massive racks full of alternative armies figures, including the Fantasy Warlord, which I think might be coming later. Yeah, alternative armies. So there's some flintlock stuff there eventually, and again, a lot of the Warzone stuff was there as well. Lots and lots of that stuff. That's why I picked up a couple of packs of those back in the day, and lots of D&D stuff as well.
Oh, okay.
It was all in top floor of Antics.
It was fairly well stocked then.
Yes, yeah.
I do remember going into a shop, and I don't remember the name of the shop, but it was very much that kind of thing. It may even have been an Antics down in Exeter one time when we were on holiday, and they had walls of the Target Games miniatures and the alternative armies stuff, and I think a bit of Raoul Parser. And I remember just going, mad and insisting that we go back to this shop sort of every day for a week to kind of work out what I was going to buy at the end of the week on my holiday allowance.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
I mean, you used to get these things in a lot more shops than you do now.
Yeah.
I'd say it's perhaps more popular than it's ever been. But at the same time,
online though, isn't it? Now I think there are very few. You get a few quite big shops, but then even then they're not really carrying walls of blister pack stuff. It's all boxed games, isn't it?
Yeah, apart from Games Workshop, obviously.
Yeah, of course. They're doing their.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't go somewhere where you find, a dozen manufacturers on one wall of walls.
Like Antics has stopped doing that sort of thing. BT's no longer exists. They were the big one for me.
Which is a shame, because I mean the way that I used to buy miniatures anyway was to have a look on the wall and see what caught my eye, and I wasn't particularly bothered about collecting for an army or for a cohesive force. It was just what was the prettiest miniature that I could see that I could afford within my budget, and I'd buy that and paint that and then go back for another one. So we had some very mixed armies in the little club in my village that I used to play Warhammer with. Everything was based on alignment, so you'd have Chaos Warriors and Chaos Dwarves and Orcs and Goblins and Beastmen running along together, and then facing a grand alliance of humans and elves and dwarves, and just because that's the figures that we could muscle together to get a decent sized force on the table.
So where I might have had more of a connection to various games in shops at the time in the 90s, sounds like you had more of a connection to actually playing the damn thing.
Well, yeah, but only so. My little Warhammer club in the village that had about 6 of us in it. We first of all we got the little quick start guide that was in the 4th edition Warhammer box set, the High Elves versus the Goblins, and that basically was how we played Warhammer for probably 6 months after that, because it was a free handout off the table of the local toy shop, and none of us knew what the stats of any of the other miniatures were, so it was just basically roll a dice. One side has Goblin stats, one side has High Elf stats, and that's how it.
Fair enough.
But then one of the guys got hold of the 3rd edition rulebook, so we played 4th edition with 3rd edition profiles essentially, and then 5th edition came out, and then we just played 5th edition from that point onwards. So
whereas
we got quite a few games in, but they were very, very small games. We're talking a dozen models aside, but certainly no giant battles.
So I was mostly playing with my dad and my brother. Mm-hmm. We didn't really go to there was a club later on. It still plays now. Well, presumably doesn't during COVID, obviously, but down in Slimbridge in the Berkeley Arms, but that wasn't until much later.
Right.
And entirely historical stuff. So I was mostly playing ACW and World War II stuff with my dad. A few other things.
That's where I guess you've got more of a kind of experience of a range of things, because I have played very little historical, have very little sort of interest in historical, but the kind of, I guess that's the setting that fed into the early Warhammer systems very much came from various kinds of historical. So although my experience is largely Games Workshop's way of playing war games, that's not necessarily the way that a lot of other people at the time would have approached playing.
No.
Same kind of
a lot of the ideas in Warhammer aren't a million miles away from WRG's from the Ancients wargaming. It's just a very Warhammer is a very old school kind of game, except that it ignores certain things that other people found important, like order systems and written orders, especially in the WRG days is the main thing. But it even when it came out, even by 1985, 1984. The way Warhammer did things was already a little bit behind the times.
Sure. Perhaps,
but it obviously caught on quite well anyway, and I enjoy it. But it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, the main thing it brought new to the sphere was the psychology rules. That's the main thing. People didn't do that so much beforehand, but other than that, it's
yeah.
Anyway,
I guess it's easier to do the kind of psychology things if you're turning everything into a fantasy situation. Yes. And you're although the units are not, a unit of 10 models in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, even first edition, is not 10 orcs. It's representing a much larger force.
Yeah.
But if you simplify it down to 10 models, it's much easier to work out their psychology than thinking, if this is a block of 500 men, what are they doing at this point in the battle?
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the things that I picked up in my local toy shop that wasn't Games Workshop was Havok. And personally, I had a bunch of these figures and I painted them up and I used them for playing Space Hulk with some mates. Never actually played Havok, but I know that you're quite a big fan. I would say quite a big fan.
Yep.
You've got quite a large Havok collection and did actually get some games in.
Yes, well, I have quite a large Havok collection, but quite a large Havok collection still fits in a box this big.
Oh, there you go. There's your Havok collection.
One of the great advantages at the moment, this is every single Nexus figure that I have, all in one bag.
Yeah, and all painted, of course.
Because, yeah, and then that's the thing, that unlike, say, Warhammer or 40k, you can just shove these things in a bag, and that's why I've managed to keep them with me for so long, I think. It's because no matter where I've been, going to university or something else, the damn things are so durable. They don't break. They're soft
bendy plastic.
Bendy plastic. And you just shove them in a box or a bag. And I've carried those things around with me years. I played it a lot as a kid with my brother.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest with you, I like you. Because I first of all found, this is how the figure packs used to look, by the way. So if anyone may have recognised those on the.
I remember that one. I remember having some alternative gene sealers that were very much like that, painted purple.
Well, those you mostly would have found in Woolworths. That's where they mostly seem to turn up.
Right. So this is a game that massively flopped and failed because of a particularly poor marketing strategy.
It wasn't so much a marketing strategy; it was so much as a release strategy.
Okay, yeah. So I found Havok in the local toy shop, the same place that I found my sort of wall of Games Workshop listed. And there was absolutely no way of sort of deciding what they were going to have eaten. They had, you know, a dozen packs and you could pick from them, and then you go in the next time and there'd be slightly fewer packs, and when they ran out you'd never see them again ever because they were selling off old stock. But this was Bluebird Toys, is that right?
Bluebird Toys, yes. 1996 or 7 was it? I can't remember now.
Okay.
1996.
Trying to get in on the Warhammer 40k scene.
Yeah, when we're talking about marketing, they did pretty good job. They went all out on these things because they had 2000 AD, very deep connections to 2000 AD. They had every single there we are. They had guides. And so every single issue of 2000 AD for a short while, they had like guides in there and store.
It's good art as well. It's like proper
it's
2000 AD color comic art.
They spent a lot of money on it. And the figures sculpted by John Pickford, I believe. Was it?
I'm not sure.
I'll have to check that up at some point. But
yeah, maybe
it's someone famous from the old Hammer crowd, anyway. But their mistake was tying into Argos, which was a thing Bluebird did a lot, you know, with ranges that it thought would sell largely through toy shops. They often ended up tied into deals with Argos.
Mm-hmm.
And then this exclusivity deal with Argos meant that they weren't allowed to sell it anywhere else. It was only allowed to be sold through Argos.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I've already mentioned that where I found what games were available was generally in the Argos.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a big thing. But the big problem is that anybody looking at it in an Argos catalogue didn't really know what it was. But the biggest problem was that, if you remember what Argos was like, you couldn't buy something specific. When you bought a line, you put your code in, you bought a line, you got a completely random pack from that thing. So you might have wanted these guys and ended up with something completely different. So nobody could really judge what they were picking up.
Which is really helpful if you're trying to, you know, build a specific force in a specific way. Yeah.
And so by the time it was in the toy shops where you and I found it, you know, by the time it was already dead. And that's why it was in the toy shops. They'd remained all the stock, and they'd gone out, and BT's and Antics and all these places had just bought up the stock. Woolworths was the biggest one. Woolworths is where you found these largely.
Right.
BT's didn't really sell these.
Okay.
But what BT's had was the skirmish battle set, the one with that rule book's from.
Yeah, with the battle forms in it.
Yeah, the battle forms.
So I had that. What I never ever came across was any of the vehicles other than the battle forms. I never saw any of the tanks.
So that's one of the guys there.
Yeah. Yeah, never ever saw boxes of those.
So, well, largely they weren't, again, because they most of them only got sold through Argos.
Right. And no one bought up remainder stock for those.
Yeah, not many people did. Now you see these guys around a bit, and they sell extras of these in boxes. Those turn up every now and again.
Yeah, I've seen loads of those.
There's two things that aren't easy to find. One of which is this chap, the big blue tank, Hammer Heavy Assault tank. He's not that easy to find, but I managed to pick him up for a tenner at a Wargames fair a long time ago. The thing that took me the longest to find was these chaps.
Oh, the infamous Banshee.
The Banshee Attack Thopters. Because these definitely were never sold anywhere other than via Argos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were never sold in it. So
they must have produced them in very small quantities then. If they
they didn't. I think it was one of the last things they actually. It's not the last thing they released, but it was one of the last things they released for it, and there really wasn't much produced. and it basically only was sold through Argos. Nobody else picked any up, as far as I'm aware. So certainly they're the hardest thing to find, apart from obviously the prototypes of some figures that they didn't actually get around to releasing. So there's like some heavy weapons teams for the Khan, the evil empire people. They did like a heavy weapons team for them. They produced some samples. There's a few of them in the wild, but they never actually got released generally. And same with the Terravor Screamers, actually, which on the back of your rulebook there, you can see there's a whole bunch of them there.
I can see the little beige things.
Little beige things.
Just here.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them there. They never hit the market. In fact, yeah, there's some Khan heavy weapons on the back there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So
they have had a few of them, evidently, because they were in the promotional shots.
Yeah.
They never hit the market. The game had already died by then. So finding those is I'm not even going to try finding those. I don't have the physical resources to.
No, fair enough.
But I've now managed to get one of everything that was ever released, that was actually properly released. I'm working my way through collecting the 2000 AD stuff because I'm quite a 2000 AD fan anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this is a fun. It's a fun little saga, and it's quite it's quite a pretty game system. The artwork, the kind of comic book style artwork is pretty nice. Quite nicely produced rule book. How does it play? Should this have been a much bigger deal than it was?
I don't think it's going to blow anyone's socks off. It's a very basic game. Then fundamentally, so is 40k, especially at the time. Mm-hmm. It's just 40k with a couple of fewer steps, and not really any special rules as such. It plays fun. It plays fast. It's very bloody. Because there's no scenarios or objectives or anything in that rule book.
Everything that moves, basically.
Just kill everything that moves.
Yeah.
So you don't end up with a lot. And there's one major flaw in the game, in the way the armor works, is that what's left at the end is always these guys.
What a surprise!
It's always come down to a fight between these guys.
Yeah.
Because they're the only ones who haven't been unlucky enough to roll. Because you have to roll. So it's, when you roll to save a hit, they fail it on a 6, basically. So you have to be lucky enough to get any hits on them in the first place, and then they have to be unlucky enough to roll a 6 specifically.
This had custom dice involved, didn't it? And you were trying to roll skulls and explosions, and if you rolled an explosion, you got to roll again and keep rolling until you rolled no more explosions, and then add up all of your skulls.
Yes, I can't find the dice at the moment, but yeah, that's basically how it works. So you've got an attack value. You roll that many dice, and you're trying to get enough hits to beat their toughness. And then for each one that you beat the toughness by, each factor of it, I guess, you roll a dice and try and roll higher than their armor value. Mm-hmm. The armor value of those things is 5, so you've got to roll a 6 on a d6 to actually kill them. That is,
if the somewhat elusive tanks had been somewhat more widely available, would we still have a chance of stomping battle forms?
Not really. I mean, these things are supposedly in the lore. If I can find one. Are you talking about this one here?
Well, yeah. Any of the tanks, because I can imagine like infantry running up to those things and the battle form just kind of drop kicking them out of the way. But you really think like the size of the weapon on that blue tank, that ought to do something, even if it just knocks it over.
Well, there's no rules for armor penetration, because I mean these things are actually designed to be battle form hunters in the setting. Because that's the other thing. Each of these things came with a little booklet with a short story in it.
Okay, nice.
There's statistics on the back. So there's spent a lot of time building the world for this thing. And these things are meant to be battle form hunters. That's why they've got this big gun on the front. They're meant to be cheap, disposable things that really hurt battle forms.
Okay.
They don't really, though. Well, they've got no bonus to penetrate that armor, and that's the fundamental.
Right.
But I remember it being a bit of a problem when we were kids, but at the same time, we were kids, you know. I'd have been what, 11?
You want it to come down to stompy robots kicking each other in the face, don't you? Really, that's when you're that age.
The game isn't for adults. It's designed to be an introductory war game for kids that could get them playing without having to worry about them mucking about with paints, because they were all pre-painted. In fact, it's the first pre-painted miniatures game to exist. So there's no mucking about with paints, just some stickers on the bases, and maybe constructing some of the bigger vehicles. So, you know, parents didn't have to worry about knives and glue and paint getting everywhere or anything else like that. And so the system is really designed just to be accessible for kids, to get them playing with something. And I think it does a really good job of that. As I say, I don't think it's going to, you know, blow anyone out of the water system-wise, because that's not what it's for.
Sure.
If it did, it probably wouldn't be that accessible for your average 10-year-old.
No, that's fine.
Which is really what it was for.
Yeah.
But it's still a fun game. And, you know, I have a lot of fond memories of it. So to be able to find just all of the stuff that I wanted to be able to play with as a kid, to now be able to is the main thing. So we'll have to get that big game in at some point.
Yeah, that would be fun. And then we'll record that for posterity. Yeah.
When you know, COVID allows.
Yeah, when we can do in-person things again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we mentioned a little bit earlier about abandoning sort of written rules, written command systems.
Yes, yeah.
But I have another game with me here. This is Trinity Battleground, which was another game that I encountered as a kid, because at the time when Necromunda came out, I couldn't afford Necromunda, and I really wanted to play Necromunda with the guys in my class. And I found this on sale in a toy shop for, I think it was probably like £10 or £15, sort of, you know, being sold off. And because it's got a couple of sort of bridges and platforms and high level things, I thought, hey, you know what, that looks a bit Necromunda-y. Let's buy that, play that instead. So I actually played quite a lot of this game as a kid. And one thing that this does is that it you at the start of each turn you have to place a counter face down by each of the figures, which puts it in a certain mode and determines the order that those figures activate and take their turns in. So I guess it's a little bit like Epic in that sense, that you're saying what they're going to do, but you're not revealing it to your opponent until that comes up. And these also had, they're not pre-painted, but they're sort of quite early resin figures, and I think these were Bob Naismith sculpts.
Naismith, it's Bob Naismith who did the.
Oh really? So maybe
that was it. Not Pickford.
Both.
Bob Naismith. So there's a reason why they're quite similar.
They had these. So like, I mean, this guy's covered in flash still, but I sort of like that to me looked like a Malcadon Spyro. You know, the Spyro with the kind of Neuro Gauntlet thing, and they had this guy who was jumping up with his kind of spidery pack on the back, and that looked a bit like a Jakara. So I used to run them as like a Spyro gang, but using the Battleground rules. And this was a White Wolf production, I think. White Wolf's only miniature battle game that they ever tried to produce, and it was a spectacular failure.
Yeah. I'm not sure why though. Do you
know
why?
I'm not sure why either. I can't really remember. I think just because it was appealing to the same market as Games Workshop, and they just weren't as big or weren't as well known as Games Workshop at that time. Yeah. I mean, some of the sculpting is a bit rough, like the aberrant. So the premise of the game is that you've got the psionics versus the aberrant, so two lots of kind of mutants versus psychokinetic power type things going on, and it plugs into the Aeon Trinity role-playing game. But these guys are really, really rough. They're like sort of, I want to say they're a bit like the Mantic Dead Zone mutants. You know, they're kind of very lumpy, Play-Doh-y sculpts. So they're not particularly brilliant, but I think they were doing resin at a time when these are definitely spin cast resin. If you look at the kind of flashing on here, that's definitely spin cast resin. I think maybe that was
they were certainly one of the first
early days of resin figures. They did do them in metal as well, which is weird. They did exactly the same sculpts in metal, but I never ever saw those in crystals.
No, I've seen pictures of them. I've seen one or two packs on eBay.
Mm-hmm.
But they're metal versions of the figures that we've already got from the box set.
Yeah, sure.
Because I managed to pick up a set, as you know, a few months back for about a tenner, about the same price as you got it on the. So it's certainly an interesting looking game, and we should definitely look forward to getting that on the table.
I quite like the character building, because you get the little cards that have, then they've got the little tokens with the guns and the armor, and you put them in the slots and sort of fill that up.
A little bit like XCOM.
Yeah, it feels like a very kind of tactile building game, and it's got the rules for sort of levels and terrain features and a few scenarios in it. I'm not sure why it didn't make it, apart from maybe competition at the time.
Competition. I guess I don't recall seeing any magazines at the time.
No.
So it could be just that they were, because they're a role-playing company, that they just weren't marketing it to the right people.
Mm.
The other thing, it is quite a complex book, isn't it? Because you've got all the character creation and stuff like that, which
it's very much a kind of role-play game with miniatures. It's very much focused on the sort of the individual and their actions and their kit and their movement. You're playing with maybe 8 to 10 figures aside, if you don't count squads, and squads count as sort of one figure but with multiple bases essentially. And in fact, even in the core rulebook, there isn't much on the way that squads work, is there? Because you get a couple of squads in the box, but they basically stand around and shoot things so that your single characters can go off and do what they like. But there was a supplement that they had got ready for printing, but when this flopped, just never got around to printing it. I think you can find that online. It has a bit more designing your own support squads doing different things.
Yeah, I think I managed to find a copy of the PDF of that.
Right.
Because White Wolf shared it when the game ended.
Yeah.
I believe they put all that information up on PDF somewhere. But this was months ago. I was looking at it, so I can't for the life of me remember where it was. But it will be in my files.
It will be there somewhere.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the resin was an attempt to keep the cost of the box down.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't recall seeing any resin figures before them. I mean, resin vehicles, obviously, and resin terrain, but resin figures definitely seemed like a new thing to me for that period. I don't. Do you remember anyone else producing that?
No, I don't. Everything else was metal up to that point. I think and plastics were becoming fairly mainstream, but I guess maybe this didn't have a big enough production run for it to be worth them setting up injection molding.
Yeah, I think that's probably what it was. But it is phenomenally difficult to get hold of extra figures for that game.
Yeah. Well, also I don't know that it really matters, because the variation in kit is so great that you can effectively take a figure from any other game and you can stat it up for Battleground. It's not difficult to find proxies for it.
In fact, I believe didn't you used to do that with some of your Havok figures?
Yeah, in fact, yes. The Nexus Tribunes definitely made a few appearances as stand-in deluxe in my stand-in Necromunda games of Battleground. Yeah.
Well, because as I said, being both Bob Naismith, they are very similar looking figures. They have the same kind of like big pads everywhere and things, don't they?
Lots of smooth areas for you to put your water slide transfers onto. That made everyone think that you could paint really well as long as you got no creases in them.
Yeah. I put a water slide transfer on something the other day. I haven't done one in years.
How did it go? Was it an old one? Has it kind of fallen apart? Or?
No, it was an old one. It hadn't fallen apart. It was totally fine. No creases, nothing. Excellent. But I'm buggered if I remember how I managed to make decals not look obviously like they were water slide decals. They leave an edge around them.
Yeah.
It's different colours.
A lot of people say that if you brush matte varnish up to the edge of the pad, then it can kind of blend it in up to the edge of the transfer. It can kind of blend it in, but I don't know.
I have to take a look at that because I put it on just one of my figures, and now that the shoulder pad, it was that plasma new, the conversion thing I did.
Yeah.
And I put a Nurgle decal on his shoulder pad just because it was.
Well, that's all right. You just get some rust effect or something and stipple it around.
But,
yeah. So the other game of that era, I guess, that I certainly saw on walls of blister packs, and we were talking about this a bit earlier, was the Warzone stuff from Target Games. Again, mentioning big shoulder pads, because really, seriously, big shoulder pads on.
Yeah, some comically large ones on some of those figures. And I like the aesthetic. I mean, it's obviously it looks a little silly sometimes, but yeah.
It's an odd range, isn't there? Because there's some really pretty sculpts in amongst it, and there's some very Play-Doh-y things. I'm not sure how many people they had sculpting for them, but they're.
I don't know, but they have a bit of a range, yeah. But they also have some very unique aesthetics to a lot of the stuff, especially the I can't remember what they call them now. The dark, is it Dark Brotherhood? And
maybe the Brotherhood or the church, wasn't it Brotherhood Church? Something.
I can't remember now.
It's been a long
time since I've really looked at it. And so it was
I think that was the first system that I was aware of that had that kind of sort of Japanese influence. It was very samurai-looking models in there. Before sort of Infinity was running with it's very kind of Japanese-looking power armor. There was quite a heavy leaning towards that in some of the Warzone figures.
Yes, there was some, and obviously the Mishima faction as well, especially so being the Japanese sort of look, which I'd quite like to put a force together at some point. So that was, but I'm not sure that was a little known one. I guess it's perhaps not as well known now as it used to be.
Maybe not. No, or certainly because it's not around anymore. I think, although the Mutant Chronicles has been redone as a role play because it was a role play, and then it's been redone as a different role play system.
Yeah,
so maybe that's better known. Whereas a lot of kind of 90s ranges have been bought up by other people, and you can still find them in odd corners of the internet in other people's shops. I'm not aware that any of the Warzone stuff got that.
Well, Mutant says Prince August.
Yeah, but there's nothing there now on their website. I don't think. Really? I think maybe they were selling off old stock, but
no, there's all the old Warzone. What they haven't got there anymore is the plastics.
Right.
And I think you can still get the second edition rulebook, but they don't have the plastics or the box sets.
Okay.
But all the metal figures they still produce.
Okay.
So I was looking at, and I can pick up a 500-point Mishima Force I said I was starting up earlier for about £45, including postage.
Oh, well, that's pretty good, isn't it?
So,
That's yeah, cheaper than the new 40k Grimdark box set, whatever that's called.
well, I don't know actually. 'Cause I mean,
Well, you're getting one side, I guess.
So yeah, it's like 45 quid. And the great thing about the new versions of 40k is that they do these sort of really, really beginners box sets. So you remember what the box sets used to be like for 40k, and still are to a certain extent. They still do the big box sets. But it used to be the case that unless you got that big box set or spent a lot of money on your figures, you couldn't play.
Sure.
And those box sets were quite pricey. I mean, look at them back now and they were like 40, 50 quid. But that was in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, that's why I got my battle zone.
Exactly.
It wasn't 40, 50 quid.
So, that's a lot of money now. Whereas you can to get started in 40k, you can pick up a £30 starter set, which gives you a handful of Space Marines and a handful of evil space robots, and the rules to play them, and dice, and a ruler, and like a little crappy paper mat and stuff. And you can get playing with a kid for about, I forget the exact price, but it's about 30 quid, which isn't that bad, really.
No,
obviously, it's not an army that you can take down the shop, but for getting started in, it's a lot more affordable than some other games these days, which is strange to say about Games Workshop.
Yeah. It's a bit of an odd turnaround, isn't it? But
yeah.
Finally, they're doing something right again.
Yeah, well, I think they've been doing that lately in the company, haven't they? But I mean, yeah, to play it fully, I guess, to get really heavily into it, it's still expensive. It's still Games Workshop. They still like to charge as much as they possibly can, but they have more avenues for people to play smaller games and to get kids involved than they used to. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about.
Well, thank you, Chris, for joining me for a natter about 90s sci-fi games that aren't by Games Workshop. We'll meet up again and talk about some 90s fantasy games that aren't by Games Workshop.
Yes.
I've read some rules and remembered what it was that I used to say.
Yeah, there's a couple of those.
Yeah, I'll try and dig out some of the miniatures as well, because most of my fantasy armies, I think back then, were pulled together from lots of other sort of rules. So even though I was playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I was not using that many Games Workshop figures, I don't think, because I have found plenty of alternatives. So
well,
try and dig them out.
Yeah, unfortunately, my Hordes of the Things stuff is all with my dad. But I've got the rule book, so
we can talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, and
thanks for having me.
For joining me, and we'll see you again next week.
All right. Ta-ra.